Welcome back to the stage, Gautam Gujral. Do you need this? And now we're joined by Will Conley from Perkins Coie. Will is an associate at the firm with a focus on blockchain and virtual currency, and has spent a lot of time in transactions, commercial and political litigation, IP, and VC law. Specifically, as our old friend Valeska Peterson Hintz, who's a partner at Perkins Coie, said, she said that Will is the in-house, like, all-in blockchain expert at Perkins Coie. So I'm not sure if you know that that's what they think of you there. So good job with that. Okay, they recognize your expertise. Will's a Wisconsinite. Are you a Badger too?
Twice.
Yeah, double Badger. Nice. He's part of the Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan Contest, and helps entrepreneurs at the seed stage level in that community and others. And excited to do some work with you, and really excited given your focus on DeFi and Web3 and how that squares with the kind of legal compliance focused tokenization that we've been talking about so much today. So please join me in welcoming Gautam and Will Conley.
So, this panel is really, it's for me, okay? You guys get to listen in, okay? Because what this is that Will's gonna help me answer all the questions that my 20-plus-year-old kids and their friends ask me about, tokenization. What we're gonna stay away from is tokenizing of equities and bonds and stuff like that, which we've spent a lot of time on already today, and we'll have some more sessions on that. But today, it's the fun stuff, okay? So it's the stuff that, what kind of fun stuff do you see? What happens?
A bit of introduction. So associate at Perkins Coie. I sort of grew up in the practice doing a mix of VC and some commercial litigation, and so got familiar with formation, equity raises, and so on, but picked Perkins because of the blockchain practice. And before going to law school, when I was in law school, was involved in entrepreneurship with various blockchain projects and use cases for both enterprises and startups, and so I was familiar with the space. And at Perkins, we see the full mix. So my practice is pretty much anything that's tokens, non-fungible or fungible tokens. On the advising side, regulatory advising, which will touch securities, money transmission, commodities, and so on. And then a lot of onboarding Web 2 to Web 3. And then token issuer, both issuance and then on the investor side, if investors are looking to invest, or in fungible tokens or non-fungible tokens, and then issuing NFTs, and then tokenizing assets. So we really have seen almost all of it. So it's a pretty wild spectrum of things going on in the space. And I'll say sort of a few things specifically on the token side. So outside of tokenized equity, and it's been great to learn a lot about what everyone's been doing here, I'd say the most common use cases we see lately, so 2021, 2022 cycle, play to earn gaming, both for fungible tokens and NFTs. Really popular. I'm actually going next week to the Video Game Bar Association conference for a panel on NFTs. I think there's going to continue to be a big explosion of NFTs for gaming, and it's exciting to see sort of the use case there.
What did you call it? Which bar association was it?
Video Game Bar Association,
Video
I'm not a member.
Association. Think about that.
Yeah, I learned about it myself last week. So, but it's interesting because we're seeing digital economies popping up that are integrated with metaverses, where companies come to us, or you'll just see them in the market, where they say, look, we have people who are in game all day, and they have assets they want to be involved with. They have characters that they want to be freely transferable. They have designer clothing. There's popular brands that have designer clothing that end up in these metaverses. and they realize it's a digital economy and they want to have fungible tokens, right, that are in that economy, and they want to have non-fungible tokens to represent those assets and have them be transferable in the game. And so it's a great use case for what we see for blockchain. It's exciting to see. So that's one, and then.
And so they come to you and they have great ideas, right? And then what do you tell them? What kind of things do they want to do with them? And what do you tell them?
And in the typical lawyer answer, it depends. And it depends where you are and what you want to do, right? Just to fill it out, I suppose, and then there's rewards and payments. You'll see IoT, XY is here, where people want to incentivize actions. And then, let's see, I actually wrote it down because I did it for others. And then, metaverse economies. And then we've seen other tokenized structures, which you guys are even probably more familiar with, like tokenized natural resources and so on. So if people come and they say, what do we want to do? I think it runs the gamut, right? Sometimes if you have a fully fleshed out platform and you have NFTs, then and where is it? Some of these issuers or whoever they are, maybe they're in Asia, maybe they're in Latin America, maybe they're in America, and so it really depends, right?
I would think they would come to you because they're in America, or at least they want to get involved in America.
Yeah, it's interesting. Since the practice is extremely international, I think a lot of projects have international contributors, creators, advisors, and customers. And then as we'll get to, under Reg S, to the extent you're issuing fungible tokens, given the likely security status of many of the use cases we see, it ends up being under Reg S, and then so we have, they end up being non-domestic, just offshore tokens, and then you have to create a platform that is able to be accessible and sort of has the right access restrictions to ensure that you're in compliance there.
Okay, so let's assume that I'm somebody who comes to you and says, look, I've got this awesome gaming platform and I want to issue a token, and I want to issue it to a lot of people who can then use it on my platform, right? So, create the offering document.
Right.
And what's your response?
Yeah, and in most cases that would be pre-platform. So you have an idea, you'd like to use the funds, you want to do a raise, you'll use the funds to create the platform. You'll have the token be usable on the platform. And so in that case, the analysis would be likely it would be a security. So typically, and depending on where the issuer is, sometimes if they're offshore, if they're already in Europe, right, they don't have a US parent or whatever, then it could be under Reg S for Category 1, but typically it'd be Category 3, which is there's certain restrictions and compliance that some of you likely know about. And so there's sort of a roadmap you have to put together where you have to plan out very early the stages of what this is going to look like, what advisors to engage. Vertalo is one for a lot of different steps where you need to put together a series of very careful planning and have a long-term plan so that you don't accidentally, as Dave was talking about, it's very easy to go online in 5 minutes. You've created 1 billion ERC20 tokens, and you can distribute them all over the world. And so it's not necessarily the smartest thing to do. And so if you'd like to build them into a digital economy, right, with the proper protections and in compliance with sanction laws and securities laws and all the various money transmission, there's a lot of additional considerations you need to think of through. So we help people think through those.
And have there been successful launches of these tokens in the US, or are they all offshore?
That's a good question. There have been, and it sort of depends sort of the route that people go. I think the thing that you have to be careful about, and the problem I think a problem people run into is if you're a domestic issuer and you're issuing what's clearly a security token, and it may be for utility, you may have a purpose that you're planning, like it'll eventually be used on my gaming platform and so on. When you issue it under Reg S, and then it has to be an offshore transaction, you can't have directed selling efforts in the US, you can't go around the US telling people everyone should get on this platform and then go find these tokens. You do end up sort of being in a box where you've made a path, you have this security, you're releasing it offshore, and you have to set up these platform protections in a way where maybe you have a platform that restricts access to US persons potentially indefinitely until there's more clarity on who from the US can use it and why. And then you also have the potential maybe to create a two-token model. So there's no action letters, which we've discussed and we can talk about, on the ability to create a token that is not necessarily a security. But I think the difference is those aren't necessarily commercially attractive. And that's something to touch on, I think, is there's a lot of market pressure that people see where you look out in the market and you can just see crazy gains, you see crazy projects, you see cool ideas where people are saying, I'm releasing, even in the NFT space, here's the NFTs and they're appreciating in price and we'll release them in a few months and people can do this. And there's these market standards people see that aren't necessarily compliant and can get issuers into trouble. And so it's interesting to work with clients who are like, well, we'd like to participate. Huge, big clients who think, we'd love to participate in NFT drops, and we're going to create a lot of hype for them, and then we want them. And so you sort of have to tell them, like, look, if you're going to do this in this way, that itself can be a security, and so you're going to need to restructure this. And so I do think, to answer your question, there have been a number of successful projects, although in a way I think it is difficult for a lot of issuers to be in that box and find ways to
Right, because when you're doing an offering like that, if it's unregistered, unless you're using Reg A or CF, then you're under Reg D, and that means that the people actually having fun with these fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens, they're like 18 or younger, and they're probably not accredited investors, so they can't buy them.
Right.
So the foreigners might be able to buy them.
And we do. What's interesting is from offshore exchanges, we see, I think we'll ultimately, there's not always a willingness to treat tokens that would be a security as U.S. which could not be, if there's no native financial return, and I'm not an attorney in other jurisdictions, but there's other jurisdictions where it may not be a security. And there's exchanges and so on that are maybe reticent to accept that if it's a security in the U.S., and that creates some other tension for clients. But I think there's potential that we could start seeing tokens tradable on ATSs and tradable in U.S. markets when treated as a security, and there's Reg D or other transfers. While offshore, they could circulate more freely with the right protections and the right flowback protections.
Okay, well, I'd like to see that happen,
Yeah.
because I mean the way the SEC has been going about it, saying that everything's a security and you got to treat it as such, then I think that having it flow back into the United States without an exemption is going to be a problem, right? But so that's something that we'll talk about more tomorrow with Steve Lofty about different ways for the U.S. to maybe reform its laws and its regulations to allow for this kind of stuff, because I think it's becoming clear that while the SEC has been very helpful in certain areas with tokenization and stuff, when it comes to equities and bonds, but when it comes to this type of usage of blockchain technology, that it just doesn't work. I'll give you an example. Well, you want to share some examples of where the SEC has said this token works and
Yeah. So
the shortcomings of that?
Yeah, so if you sort of came to us and you said, look, we want a token that's freely tradable in the U.S., right? And we have a domestic platform. And a lot of the commercial attractive things, like if you wanted to be variable price, limited supply, for the purpose, because you see it in the market of we want people to be able to make money on this and to have it, and it's cool that it's usable on our platform. It's something where you basically say, look, if you don't have a safe harbor exemption, you aren't going to be able to release a limited supply, freely tradable, variable price token into U.S. markets. And so what you can look to are the no action letters and so on, and those basically rely on the flip of that, which is fixed price. Not necessarily stablecoin, not necessarily asset-backed, but just a fixed-price token where it's unlimited supply. You're always ready to issue it. You're always ready to redeem it for, let's say, $1. And so there are two examples: Pocket Full of Quarters and InView. There's a third one about tokenization of interest in private jets. But the first two are sort of that model where you have a token that there's KYC restrictions for use on the platform. It has a particular consumptive use on the platform, and there's really no point. It's not an investment because you're not going to be able to gain an appreciation because it's always going to be a fixed price. And so that is, especially in the commercial market we see today, that's not always an attractive venture. It's like, we could have credits and so on our platform. There isn't really a reason to even implement blockchain for that, for the cost and so on. And it introduces additional complexities if it is freely transferable and you don't know who you're transferring it to. So it is a tiny box to get in, and that's why we see a lot of people working to meet other exemptions and go offshore and not come back.
Right. So, they've given an exemption which doesn't work in the world, right? I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
People who probably got the exemptions are no longer in business, I would guess.
No, well, I actually don't know about Pocket Full of Quarters, but Imbu's doing very well. They have a metaverse, and they did launch a second token under Reg S.
Okay.
So they have, there's a potential, there's a 2-token model where you have a domestic token, non-security, and then maybe you have an offshore international token, which is you treat as a security because that's the guidance we have from the SEC until further notice. So for the foreseeable future, there's no public market in the U.S. for it.
But it can be used on the platform.
Yep, with the correct platform restrictions. So then you have a second order issue of now we have a platform where we'd like people to use this, but we can't allow the U.S. people to use it. So now I have to bifurcate my platform, and it certainly creates some logistical issues for the use. So if you're setting out to create one of these, and you see what people are doing in the market, and you set to create it, you have to think ahead and say, which type of token would we like? What exemption are we going to use on to issue it? And how are we going to continue to comply from day one and then into the future with how that token should be used? And the thing is, that's just on the security side, because then you have the tax considerations. Maybe if you issue it offshore, and so we see, like Deloitte, they do a good job of working through tax considerations. And then you have sanctions considerations, money transmission, the wallet. Will this be in a custodial wallet? Who's responsible for the wallet? Non-custodial wallet. Same with NFTs if you're using non-custodial wallets and so on, and you're selling them. And those are sort of the first level issues, but then there's second level issues of other popular things we see of royalties. That could have sanctions implications, and then you have nodes and payments, and what's interesting, like on the investor side, there's who's contributing to the network and how do you incentivize the network, and what liabilities do they have, and especially when we get into, I guess on Saturday we'll be talking about DAOs and so on, and very loose corporate structures. And the sort of layers of liability and layers of issues, and these aren't the most fun, lawyers, we spend a lot of time thinking about it, but for commercial people, you hear that and you're like, oh my God, what is the, so it's an onion that's a very difficult thing to uncrack, which is sometimes not obvious when you look at the market and people are spinning up these huge projects so quickly.
Right, because I mean, I would guess that in most cases, people who develop all this really cool stuff, right, develop it because they've thought about it a lot. They know what their peers want, but they might not be so well educated about all the stuff that you just talked about.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
I guess the advice to my kids and their friends would be, okay, make sure that one of your friends went to law school and to school.
Yeah, maybe. So, but it's also an interesting time, and like I said, when I got into it, the potential use cases for the technology can be very exciting. And even the idea of, play during gaming, it's cool to think that you could, monetize the work you've put into World of Warcraft or whatever game it is, or like if you're a great fashion designer and you can spin up metaverse assets and sell them off and so on. And so it'd be great to have more clarity and more ability for people to monetize some of the virtual work that they're doing.
But it requires some changes.
In some generally. I mean, but then it is a potential too, and we see it, here with some people talking about today. It's if you want to have a platform that's all accredited investors, that's easier. But that's not what everybody.
Because they're known to have such a good time, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk more about like what kind of changes would be necessary to enable this type of stuff tomorrow. And look forward to seeing all of you here. And, I can see why your colleagues at the law firm think that you know so much about this stuff, because you actually do. So please, a big round of applause for Will. And
thank you all.